Chapter 3. Reinforcements have arrived. The vacancies have been filled and the sacks of straw in the huts are already booked. Some of them are old hands, but there are 25 men of a later draft from the base. They are about 2 years younger than us. Krop nudges me. Seen the infants? I nod. We stick out our chests, shave in the open, shove our hands in our pockets, inspect the recruits, and feel ourselves Stone Age veterans. Katzinsky joins us. We stroll past the horse boxes and go over to the reinforcements, who are already being issued with gas masks and coffee. Long time since you've had anything decent to eat, eh? Cat asks one of the youngsters. He grimaces. For breakfast, turnip bread. Lunch, turnip stew. Supper, turnip cutlets and turnip salad. Cat gives a knowing whistle. Bread made of turnips? You've been in luck. It's nothing new for it to be made out of sawdust. But what would you say to haricot beans? Have some? The youngster turns red. You can't kid me. Katzinsky merely says, Fetch your mess tin. We follow curiously. He takes us to a tub beside his straw sack. Sure enough, it's half full of beef and beans. Katzinsky plants himself in front of it like a general and says, Sharp eyes and light fingers. That's what the Prussians say. We are surprised. Great guts, Cat. How did you come by that? I ask him. Ginger was glad I took it. I gave him 3 pieces of parachute silk for it. Cold beans taste fine, too. Patronizingly, he gives the youngster a portion and says, Next time you come with your mess tin, have a cigar or chew of tobacco in your other hand. Get me? He turns to us. You get off scot-free, of course. We couldn't do it without Katzinsky. He has a sixth sense. There are such people everywhere, but one does not appreciate it at first. Every company has one or two. Katzinsky is the smartest I know. By trade, he is a cobbler, I believe, but that hasn't anything to do with it. He understands all trades. It's a good thing to be friends with him, as Krop and I are, and Himmelstoss too, more or less. But Hay is rather the executive arm, operating under Cat's orders when things come to blows. For that, he has his qualifications. For example, we land at night in some entirely unknown spot, a sorry hole that has been eaten out by the very walls. We are quartered in a small dark factory adapted to the purpose. There are beds in it, or rather bunks, a couple of wooden beams over which wire netting is stretched. Wire netting is hard. There's nothing to put on it. Our waterproof sheets are too thin. We use our blankets to cover ourselves. Cat looks at the place and then says to Himmelstoss, Come with me. They go off to explore. Half an hour later, they are back again with arms full of straw. Cat has found a horse box with straw in it. Now we might sleep if we weren't so terribly hungry. Krop asks an artilleryman who has been some time in this neighborhood, Is there a canteen anywhereabouts? Is there a what? He laughs. There's nothing to be had around here. You won't find so much as a crust of bread here. Aren't there any inhabitants here at all, then? He spits. Yeah, a few. But they hang around the cookhouse and beg. That's a bad business. Then we'll have to pull in our belts and wait till the rations come up in the morning. But I see Cat has put on his cap. Where to, Cat? I ask. Just to explore the place a little bit. He strolls off. The artilleryman grins scornfully. Go ahead and explore, but don't strain yourself in carrying what you find. Disappointed, we lie down and consider whether we couldn't have a go at the iron rations. But it's too risky, so we try to get a wink of sleep. Krop divides a cigarette and hands me half. Chaden gives me an account of his national dish, broad beans and bacon. He despises it when not flavored with bog myrtle, and, for God's sakes, let it all be cooked together, not the potatoes, not the beans, and not the bacon separately. Someone growls that he will pound Chayton into a mogburtle if he doesn't shut up. Then all becomes quiet in the big room. Only the candles flickering from the necks of a couple bottles, and the artilleryman spitting every now and then. We are just dozing off when the door opens and Cat appears. I think I must be dreaming. He has 2 loaves of bread under his arm and a blood-stained sandbag full of horseflesh in his hand. The artilleryman's pipe drops from his mouth. He feels the bread. Real bread! By God! It's still hot, too. Cat gives no explanation. He has the bread, and the rest doesn't matter. I'm sure that if he were planted down in the middle of a desert, in half an hour he would have gathered together a supper of roast meat, dates, and wine. Cut some wood, he says curtly to Hay. Then he hauls out a frying pan from under his coat, and a handful of salt, as well as a lump of fat from his pocket. He has thought of everything. Hay makes a fire on the floor. It lights up on the empty room of the factory. We climb out of bed. The artilleryman hesitates. He wonders whether to praise Cat, and so perhaps gain a little for himself. But Katzinsky doesn't even see him. He might as well have been thin air. He goes off cursing. Cat knows the way to roast horseflesh so that it's tender. It shouldn't be put straight into the pan. That makes it tough. It should be boiled first in a little water. With our knives, we squat around a circle and fill our bellies. That's Cat. If for 1 hour in a year something eatable were to be had in some one place only, within that hour, as if moved by a vision, he would put on his cap, go out and walk directly there, as though following a compass, and find it. He finds everything. If it's cold, a small stove and wood, hay and straw, a table and chairs, but above all, food. It's uncanny. One would think he conjured it out of thin air. His masterpiece was 4 boxes of lobsters. Admittedly, he would rather have had 1 good beef steak. We have settled ourselves on a sunny side of the hut. There is a smell of tar, of summer, and of sweaty feet. Cat sits beside me. He likes to talk. Today, we have done an hour's saluting because Chayton failed to salute a major smartly enough. Cat can't get it out of his head. You take it from me. We're losing the war because we can't salute too well, he says. Crop stalks up, with his breeches rolled up and his feet bare. He lays out his washed socks to dry on the grass. Cat turns his eyes to heaven, lets off a mighty fart, and says meditatively, "Every little bean must be heard as well as seen." Cat turns his eyes to heaven, lets off a mighty fart, and says meditatively, "Every little bean must be heard as well as seen." The two begin to argue. At the same time, they lay a bottle of beer on the result of an air fight that's been going on above us. Katzinsky won't budge from the opinion which, as an old front hog, he rhymes. Give 'em all the same grub and all the same pay, and the war would be over and done in a day. Kropp, on the other hand, is a thinker. He proposes that a declaration of war would be a kind of a popular festival with entrance tickets and bands, like a bullfight. Then, in the arena, the ministers and generals of the two countries, dressed in bathing drawers and armed with clubs, can have it out amongst themselves. Whoever survives, his country wins. That would be much simpler and more just than this arrangement, where the wrong people do the fighting. The subject is dropped. Then the conversation turns to drill. A picture comes before me, burning midday in the barrack yard. The heat hangs over the square. The barracks are deserted. Everything sleeps. All one hears is the drummers practicing. They have installed themselves somewhere and practice brokenly, dully, monotonously. What a concord! Midday heat, barrack square, and drummers beating. The windows of the barracks are empty and dark. From some of them, Trousers are hanging to dry. The rooms are cool, and one looks towards them longingly. Oh, dark, musty platoon huts, with the iron bedsteads, and the checkered bedding, the lockers and the stools. Even you can become the object of desire. Out here, you have a faint resemblance to home. Your rooms, full of the smell of stale food, sleep, smoke, and clothes. Katzinsky paints it all in lively colors. What would we not give to be able to return to it? Farther back than that our thoughts dare not go. Those early morning hours of instruction. What are the parts of the 98 rifle? The midday hours of physical training. Pianist forward. By the right. Quick, march. Report to the cookhouse for potato peeling. We indulge in reminiscence. Crop laughs suddenly and says, "Change at Lone." That was our corporal's favorite game. Lone is a railway junction. In order that our fellows going on shouldn't get lost there, Himmelstoss used to practice the change in the barrack room. We had to learn that at Lone, to reach the branch line, we must pass through a subway. The beds represented the subway, and each man stood at attention on the left side of his bed. Then came the command, "Change at Lone." And like lightning, everyone scrambled on the bed to the opposite side. We practiced this for hours on end. Meanwhile, the German aeroplane has been shot down. Like a comet, it bursts into a steamer of smoke and falls headlong. Kropp has lost the bottle of beer. Disgruntled, he counts out the money from his wallet. Surely Himmelstoss was a very different fellow as a postman, say I, after Albert's disappointment has subsided. Then how does it come that he's such a bully as a drill sergeant? The question revives Kropp, more particularly as he hears there's no more beer in the canteen. It's not only Himmelstoss, there's lots of them. As sure as they can get a stripe or a star, they become different men, just as though they swallowed concrete. That's the uniform, I suggest. Roughly speaking, it is, says Kat, and prepares for a long speech. But the root of the matter lies somewhere. For instance, if you train a dog to eat potatoes and then afterwards put a piece of meat in front of him, he'll snap at it. It's his nature. And if you give a man a little bit of authority, he behaves just the same way. He snaps at it too. The things are precisely the same. In himself, man is essentially a beast. Only he butters it over like a slice of bread, with a little decorum. The army is based on that. One man must always have power over the other. The mischief is merely that each one has much too much power. A non-com can torment a private, a lieutenant, a non-com, a captain, a lieutenant, until he goes mad. And because they know they can, they all soon acquire the habit more or less. Take a simple case. We are marching back from the parade ground, dog-tired. Then comes the order to sing. We sing spiritlessly, for it is all we can do to trudge along with our rifles. At once the company is turned about and has to do another hour's drill as punishment. On the march back, the order to sing is given again, and once more we start. Now what's the use of all that? It's simply that the company commander's head has been turned by having so much power, and nobody blames him. On the contrary, he is praised for being strict. That, of course, is only a trifling instance, but it holds also in very different affairs. Now I ask you, let a man be whatever you like in peacetime. What occupation is there in which he can behave like that without getting a crack on the nose? He can only do that in the army. It goes to the heads of all of them, you see. And the more insignificant a man has been in civil life, the worse it makes him. They say, of course, there must be discipline, ventures Kropp meditatively. True, growls Kat. They always do. And it may be so. Still, it oughtn't be an abuse. You should try to explain that to a blacksmith or a laborer or a workman. You try to make that clear to a peasant, and that's what most of them are. That's what most of them are here. All he sees is that he's been put through the mill and has been sent to the front. But he knows well enough what he must do and what he must not. It's simply amazing, I tell you, that the ordinary Tommy sticks it all up here in the front line. Simply amazing. No one protests. No one protests. Everyone knows that drill ceases only in the front line and begins again a few miles behind. With all the absurdities of saluting and parade, it is an iron law that the soldier must be employed under every circumstance. Here Chayton comes up with a flushed face. He is so excited that he stutters. Beaming with satisfaction, he stammers out, "Himmelstoss is on this way. He's coming to the front." Chayton has a special grudge against Himmelstoss because of the way he educated him in the barracks. Chayton wets his bed. He does it at night in his sleep. Himmelstoss maintained that it was sheer laziness and invented a method worthy of himself for curing Chayton. He hunted up another piss-a-bed named Kintervader from a neighboring unit and quartered him with Chayton. In the huts there were the usual bunks, one above the other in pairs, with mattresses or wire netting. Himmelstoss put these two so that one occupied the upper and one occupied the lower bunk. The man underneath, of course, had a vile time. The next night, they were changed over, and the lower one got put on top so that he could retaliate. That was Himmelstoss's system of self-education. The idea was low, but not ill-conceived. Unfortunately, it accomplished nothing because the first assumption was wrong. It was not laziness in either of them. Anyone who looked at their sallow skin could see that. The matter ended in one of them always sleeping on the floor, where he frequently caught cold. Meanwhile, Hay sits down between us. He winks at me and rubs his paws thoughtfully. We once spent the finest day of our army life together. The day before we left for the front. We had been allotted to one of the recently formed regiments, but we were first to be sent back for equipment to the garrison. Not to the reinforcement depot or course, but to another barracks. We were due to leave the next morning early. In the evening, we prepared ourselves to square accounts with Himmelstoss. We had sworn for weeks past to do this. Kropp had even gone so far as to propose entering the postal service in peacetime in order to be Himmelstoss's supervisor when he became a postman again. He reveled in the thought of how he would grind him. It was this that made it impossible for him to crush us altogether. We always reckoned that later, at the end of the war, we were going to have our revenge on him. In the meantime, we decided to give him a good hiding. What could he do to us, anyhow, if he didn't recognize us? And we left early in the morning. We knew which pub he used to visit every evening. Returning to the barracks, he had to go along a dark, uninhabited road. There we waited for him, behind a pile of stones. I had a bed cover with me. We trembled with suspense, hoping he would be alone. At last we heard his footstep, which we recognized easily. So often we had heard it in the mornings as our door flew open and he bawled, "Get up!"
"Alone?" whispered Kropp. "Alone."
I slipped around the pile of stones with Chayton. Himmelstoss seemed a little elevated. He was singing. His belt buckle gleamed. He came on unsuspectingly. We seized the bed cover and made a quick leap. threw it over his head from behind and pulled it round him, so that he stood there in a white sack, unable to raise his arms. The singing stopped. The next moment, Hay Westhouse was there, and spreading his arms, he shoved us back in order to be the first in. He put himself in position with evident satisfaction, raised his arm like a signal mast, and his hand like a coal shovel, and fetched such a blow on the white sack as would have felled an ox. Himmelstoss was thrown down. He rolled 5 yards and started to yell, but we were prepared for that, and had brought a cushion. Hay squatted down, laid on the cushion on his knees, felt where Himmelstoss's head was, and pressed it down on the pillow. Immediately his voice was muffled. Hay let him get a gasp of air every so often. When he would give a mighty yell, that was immediately hushed. Chayden unbuttoned Himmelstoss's braces and pulled down his trousers, holding the whip meantime in his teeth. Then he stood up and set to work. It was a wonderful picture. Himmelstoss on the ground, Hay bending over him with a fiendish grin and his mouth open with bloodlust. Himmelstoss's head on his knees. Then he convulsed, stripped drawers, the knock knees, executing every blow, most original movements, in the lowered breeches, and towering over them like a woodcutter, the indefatigable Jayden. In the end, we had to drag him away to get our turn. Finally, Hay stood Himmelstoss on his feet, and gave one last personal remonstrance, as he stretched out his right arm preparatory to giving him a box on the ear. He looked as if he were going to reach down a star. Himmelstoss toppled over. Hay stood him up again, made ready, and fetched him a second, a well-aimed beauty with the left hand. Himmelstoss yelled and made off on all fours. His striped postman's backside gleamed in the moonlight. We disappeared at full speed. Hay looked around us again and said wrathfully, satisfied, and rather mysteriously, "Revenge is black pudding." Himmelstoss ought to have been pleased. His saying that we should each educate one another had borne fruit for himself. We had become successful students of his method. He never discovered whom he had to thank for the business. At any rate, he scored a bed cover out of it, for when we returned a few hours later to look for it, it was no longer there to be found. That evening's work made us more or less content to leave the next morning, and an old buffer was pleased to describe us as young heroes.